My understanding is I'm supposed to do a little bit about the tree farm and then introduce Indiana Forest and Woodland Owners Association. So back in 1956, when I was 2, my family moved outside of Crawfordsville to a just under 40-acre hobby farm. My father went down in the floodplain where they'd had a harvest back in 1943 and did TSI and planted in some stuff. And there was a little cornfield that it was hard to get to, so he planted that to hardwoods. And I grew up looking at these rows and rows of trees. Well, starting in about 2000, I've been converting about 10 acres a year into trees, doing stupid ag ground, old pasture ground, that kind of stuff. And I've pretty much gotten most of the stupid ag ground out of the farm into trees. So now I'm starting to look a little bit as a bigger picture and creating big blocks of forest for habitat. Got a new planter. I hope to be doing 20 acres a year from now on. So, and I'm driving now instead of actually bending down and putting the trees in the ground. So life is good. I spent about half my time doing invasives control. I've lost 50 pounds since I started that project about 20 or so years ago. I can't remember exactly. It's been a while. Been long enough that I've done four passes on some of the properties. We can hear church bells in the morning. So we're right outside town. I have suburbia on both sides of me in town. So I'm kind of pretty far ahead of the invasives curve for most woodland owners. We have a little SISMA that started up in our county, so I'm looking forward to working with them and hopefully try to get some sort of a Habitat for Humanity project going where we do a round robin and you do mine, and I'll do yours, and we all get a lot more done and share tools and toys and techniques. So I really have enjoyed being in the forestry organizations that I'm in, and my favorite is the Indiana Forest Woodland Owners Association that educates about and advocates for responsible forest conservation and management. We support scientific best practices to achieve objectives of clean water, wildlife habitat, soil protection, native species diversity, timber production, recreation, carbon sequestration, and many others. Membership is available to woodland owners or anyone interested in forestry. We provide fundamental learning opportunities such as webinars, forestry field days, and workshops representing woodland owners' interests at the state legislature and with state agencies, and share regional and national resources through our affiliation with the National Woodlands Owners Association. Please visit our website to learn more about ifwoa.org. Getting around a lot of other woodland owners is a wonderful experience. Not very many other people have the time horizons that we do. So now to introduce this evening's presentation is our Executive Director of IFWA, is Liz Jackson.
Thank you, Raul, and welcome everyone. We're excited to have you join us tonight to hear from Amanda Wanless of Indiana Phenology on observing seasonal change. Before I pass to Amanda, I'd like to remind you to keep your microphone muted at all times to limit the distractions during her presentation. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat box at any time, and I'll be moderating those at the end. The presentation will be recorded, and I'll announce via email when it's available in a few weeks. Amanda Wanless is founder and executive director of Indiana Phenology. She holds a Master's of Public Affairs and a Master of Science in Environmental Science from Indiana University and is a certified phenology leader. She describes herself online as a volunteer naturalist, citizen scientist, and backyard explorer, which I think might describe many of us attending tonight, including myself. Now I'll turn it over to you, Amanda.
Thank you. I am excited to talk to you tonight. Let me go ahead and share my screen there. I'm going to be talking to you about observing seasonal changes in nature, and I'm going to share with you a particular lens through which to observe nature around you, and a specific tool for nature observation that's called Nature's Notebook. Before we jump into that, let's take a few minutes to set the stage, so to speak. If we were to go outside right now, what would we see? this is what I can see right now. I am located just north of Indianapolis in Carmel. We're just at the beginning of spring. We've got some silver maples here, the first spring wildflowers. I'm really excited for spring to come and not so excited for the cold weather that has come back to us. But think for a minute with me about your favorite season. What makes that your favorite season? Picture it in your mind, all of the pieces. What makes your favorite season your favorite season? You got that in your mind now? Okay, my favorite season is spring, and my close second favorite is fall. I love those seasons because of all of the changes that happen. You get in the middle of the summer and it just seems to stretch on forever with green trees and sunny weather. But spring and fall, there's so much that there is to look and see. But thinking about what your favorite season is, it's a safe bet that it's something unique about that season that makes you like it. So one thing that makes each season unique is phenology. Now that's a term that you may not have heard, but while you may not know the word, you see it happening around you all the time. And I dare say that every single one of you in this presentation today knows phenology and is intimately familiar with it. It's one of those things that make each season unique. To get really down to it, phenology is focused on the recurring life cycle events in plants and animals. In plants, we're talking about things like leafing and flowering, the ripening of crops in the fields, the emergence of insects. We're talking about the migration of birds. All of that is phenology. I like to think of phenology as the science of the seasons. It's the study of these seasonal cyclical changes, which we call phenophases, and also how their timing and relationships with each other and weather and climate are an important part of that study. So phenology is literally happening everywhere. Just a few pictures here of the diversity of things we're talking about when we talk about phenology. It's happening all the time. A lot of those things that we like about different seasons that make them our favorite are related to that phenology. Things like nest building, leaf out, fall leaves, all of that is phenology. And much of what catches our eye is related to phenology because what the plants and animals are doing at a particular point in the year is really related to the environmental conditions like weather and temperature. Phenology is a key feature of life on Earth. Birds, they time their nesting so that eggs hatch when insects are available to feed their nestlings. Insect emergence is synchronized with leaf out in the host plants. And even people. We have a link to phenology as well. I saw earlier this morning an article in the news about allergy season and how that's starting earlier this year. Allergy season starts when particular flowers are in bloom. So our allergy season is key to plant phenology. Farmers and gardeners obviously understand phenology. They need to know how the weather impacts the plant development and also what to do with all those insects and when they're going to come out and different management schedules. So when we're talking about phenology and we talk about phenophases, so phenophases are just those discrete observable life cycle events of plants and animals. And with animals, we're looking at things like their activity and their reproduction and their development. With plants, we're looking at those leaves and flowers and fruits of the life cycle. For a lot of people, especially urban office dwellers, nature isn't really a part of their everyday lives. I would imagine a lot of you, like me, spend a fair amount of time outside in nature, and probably not as much as we'd like. But people of the past were far more in tune with nature than we as a society are today. And partly that was because they had to be, because paying careful attention to surroundings could mean the difference between survival and death. But even so, nature and phenology are just as important to your lives and survival today as ever. So here's just a quick list of how phenology is important to our lives. Like I said, it affects nearly all aspects of the environment. It's related to the abundance and diversity of organisms. It affects their interactions with each other, their role in the food web, and their seasonal behavior. And even on a global scale, phenology impacts the cycles of water and carbon and chemical elements. Phenology plays a role in our health, like I mentioned allergies earlier, but another way that phenology plays a role in our health is with pest-borne diseases. One quick example is with mosquitoes. You're not at risk from mosquito-borne diseases when the mosquitoes aren't out. The mosquito phenology, the timing of when they emerge and their life cycle, really impacts the risk that we have from those pest-borne diseases. Phenology even impacts the recreation opportunities we have, conservation activities required at a particular point in the year, or even potential hazards and risks that we are looking at. So phenology can be observed in nature on many different scales. From the big picture landscape level, think the world flashing past your window as you ride down the street. But you can also get up closer with it, and it's more what you can see when you're right there. Zooming in all the way to the branches on the flowers on a branch, and then zooming in even more, phenology is in the individual flowers themselves. And phenology observation has a way of drawing us in and bringing us closer to the details of the life that really makes up the background fabric or scenery of our own lives. And another cool thing about phenology is that it is an indicator of environmental change. And as such, it's important for climate change science. The changes in phenological events like flowering or bird migrations are among the most sensitive biological responses to large-scale climate change, because the immediate environmental conditions are a big part of what cue an organism to move to the next stage of its life cycle. And across the world, many spring events are occurring earlier. And similarly, at the other end of the year, fall events are happening later than they did in past. And how the plants and animals respond to these changes can help us predict whether their populations will grow or shrink, really making phenology a leading indicator of climate change impacts. So let's look a little bit at what we're seeing changing. Looking at spring phenological events, scientists are seeing that they're occurring on average 2 days earlier per decade than they did in the past. And we're seeing this trend toward earlier springs in 62% of the species studied. So not everything is starting earlier than it used to, but we are seeing it large scale across the board. Specifically, some spring events that are occurring earlier, we are seeing trees getting their leaves earlier. We're seeing earlier flowering, earlier migrations, earlier breeding of birds and amphibians, earlier emergence from hibernation. In short, a lot of different species are responding to changing climates by starting their spring activities earlier than they did 100 years ago or even 10 years ago. But, and here's a key thing to remember, not all species and regions are changing at the same rate, which can cause problems. So how is spring 2023 shaping up? I just shared a bunch of long-term trends with you and what researchers are seeing when they look at the big picture. But let's look at what's happening this year in Indiana. So this map shows where spring has arrived in the continental US. I pulled this map up just this morning. It is the Spring Leaf Index, which is based on a model of spring leaf out and when it occurs in the country. The model was developed using decades of observations of the timing of leaf out for lilacs and honeysuckles, species that, while not native, are widespread in our country and among the earliest woody plants to leaf out. It takes current temperature conditions across the country and then uses that compared to the historical record to predict when leaf out will occur. And it's been shown to have a pretty accurate measure of what's going on in the ground. So we can see from this map that spring leaf out is occurring in the southern half of Indiana. And we can expect spring to be arriving in the rest of the state soon. But the question that always comes up for me is, how does this year compare to other years? In other words, are we seeing an earlier spring or not? And how can we know? So let's take a look at another map that answers that question. So this is called the Spring Leaf Index Anomaly. It shows the deviation from the long-term 30-year average in days of the arrival of spring. And so the dark red is 20 or more days early, and dark blue is 20 more or more days late. And then you can see the color range in between. So what we see here is that Indiana is as early as this chart can show us. It is 20 or more days earlier than average, which sounds like a lot. Interesting to note here, different parts of the country are showing different trends here. So out in the Southwest, you're seeing a lot of blue, which means their spring is later than it normally is. And then in Florida, you're seeing a little bit of reddish and pinkish and a lot of white, which means that they're about average, a little bit on the earlier side. So different regions really are different each year. There's natural normal variation from year to year and from region to region. But it's when you look at, you're looking at trends across the board. If you look at California and want to know something about Indiana, you're not really going to learn much from looking at California data, which is a theme that we'll come back to a little bit later here. All right, so question here. Yes, we're early this year, but are we seeing normal variation here, or is this like out of the ordinary variation or out of the ordinary earliness? And so this map gives us some insight into how unusual a particular amount of deviation is from the average. So this takes the anomaly map that we were just looking at and compares it to the usual amount of how often we see that particular amount of deviation. So this is the spring leaf out in the United States. There are two different scales here. The purple bluish scale relates to places that are late, and you see that out in the Southwest again. The green scale relates to places that are early, and Indiana is shaded darker green, which means, according to the scale, that the spring that we are experiencing right now is unusual. So unusual that it only occurs once every 40 years that we are that much early. And in fact, some places in Indiana may even be seeing the earliest spring on record. Something to think about when we think of climate change is that it's not going to be uniform change in any way. Again, Arizona, bluish and purplish, so they're experiencing a late spring. Some areas are even experiencing their latest spring on records, whereas here in Indiana, we're experiencing the earliest spring on record in some instances. And you can even find places on there that are dead average this year. So just like each state has its own unique history and culture, each location has its own unique climate and climate trends and climate change trends. And so it's important to rely on our local conditions and local information and local research to be able to successfully address environmental challenges where we live. Okay, bottom line here, spring is arriving early. It's arriving really early and much earlier than normal. So let's look at a couple more graphs about spring here. As I said before, we were looking at the spring leaf index, and one of the inputs into that model is daily temperatures and also temperature accumulation. So this one right here is a graph of the daily accumulation of heat, known as growing degree days. Growing degree day is a day where the average temperature is above a certain threshold. In this case, that threshold is freezing. Here we have the long-term average of growing degree days in black. So that's the line that's right in the middle there. Last year is the line that's in orange, and this year is the line that is in blue. And the red portion of that line was the forecast over the next several days when I pulled this graph. So heat accumulation is a common driver of phenological activity in plants and in some animals. Many species have specific heat accumulation thresholds. And once that threshold is reached, species will respond by leafing or flowering or emerging, depending on what species it is. So a warmer than average winter leads to an earlier than average spring. Looking at this here, what we see is, again, another way of looking at how this year so far has been really warm, warmer than average. Our blue line is quite a bit above that black average line. And we also see that last year was a bit cooler than normal. So because temperatures have been warmer than normal, we're having an earlier than normal spring. And that graph is for where I am in Carmel, but here it is a similar graph for a couple of different areas around the state. And what we're seeing is that largely all of Indiana is seeing the same trends, south, central, north, pretty much warmer than average and warmer than last year. Side note here, these graphs and the maps that I showed you are from the USA National Phenology Network and their data visualization tool, which the URL is on the slide there. You might be interested in going and inputting your own zip code to see what that graph looks like for your area. They have a lot of fun tools and data visualizations that you might want to explore. Before we move on, though, from what our spring is like right now, I want to make two important points. First, when we look at the long-term trends and changes in weather patterns, not all regions are changing at the same rate or in the same way. And second, not all species are reacting in the same way. And this is problematic. It can lead to what have been called phenological mismatches. So each species has a specific role to play in the environment. When one species starts its spring activities earlier than other species, there can be impacts, especially when those species have a relationship in the food web. So let's see how this story plays out with a mismatch with this set of characters right here. We're going to look at a migratory bird that feeds its young on these juicy little caterpillars. And the caterpillar, who would prefer not to be eaten, is more concerned about its own breakfast, and it subsists on the tender young leaves of our third character, this oak tree. And each of these three characters have their own needs and rely on their own unique internal and external cues to know when to shift to a different stage in their life cycle. So in the past, the migratory birds were cued by the conditions in their wintering grounds. They returned to their breeding grounds, they laid their eggs, which then hatched, if everything was working right, just as the number of caterpillars peaked, providing the nestlings with ample food. But now, responding to earlier spring weather, the caterpillars have been emerging earlier so that the peak in caterpillar abundance happens earlier. But if the birds aren't able to keep up with that change and lay their eggs early enough for the egg hatch to coincide with peak caterpillar abundance, that results in a phenological mismatch. So in areas where these birds have become mismatched with their food source, we see declines of up to 90% in bird populations. And the earlier the emergence of the caterpillars and the moving of those caterpillars onto their moth stage, the greater the decline in the bird population. So these 9 songbirds here are ones that scientists have shown to be unable to be keeping up with the shift in spring, and so that their nesting is no longer timed to coincide with a peak in nestling food sources. And as a consequence, there are declines in the populations of these birds. So scientists don't have the time or resources to study every species in every location, but if we wanted to understand what was happening with all species and all locations, we really would need to have on the ground information. So to understand what's going on here in Indiana, we need to either have scientists here studying those things, or they need help from citizen scientists. Citizen science is scientific research conducted in whole or in part by non-professional scientists or amateur scientists. A lot of times that's average people. It's known by many other names, And it really complements the work done by professional scientists by adding depth or breadth to their work, because scientists don't have the time or resources to study every species everywhere. But with the help of volunteer observers, we can understand more. Interesting thing to note, the invention of the internet was really a boon to citizen science because it allowed easy data sharing and storage. And the term citizen science is a relatively new term, but not a new concept, because it's something that we've been doing as humans for as long as we've existed. So citizen scientists have been shown to be as good at collecting data as professionals, especially trained citizen scientists. Authors of one research study estimated that the value of the contributions of volunteer citizen scientists is equal to $2.5 billion annually, which is not a small amount. And citizen science and the data that has been collected by citizen scientists is really becoming increasingly prevalent in peer-reviewed scientific literature. And that's what this graph shows. You can see the number of peer-reviewed publications starting in 1997 that included data from citizen scientists all the way up to 2014, and that's a dramatic rise, and that trend has just been increasing over time. So I want to introduce you to two citizen scientists. While they didn't necessarily set out to be scientists or call themselves that, what they did do was keep careful records of their local phenology. So we have here Henry David Thoreau. He kept detailed records of plant phenology at Walden Pond. You may have heard of him or read his book. And then Aldo Leopold and his daughter, Nina Leopold Bradley, who's pictured here, and they both kept detailed records at the shack in Wisconsin of plant and animal phenology, including the arrival times of migratory birds. And in recent years, scientists have gone back to those same locations and compared what's happening now to what they recorded in their time. And we've learned some interesting things. So let's take a look at that. So Thoreau's observations of flowering plants that he recorded in his journals have been compared to the same species at Walden Pond in recent years, and they found that on average, those species are flowering about 7 days earlier than they did in his time. There are a number of reasons this may be the case, including the potential influence of the urban heat island in proximity to Walden Pond. But the important thing to note here is that without his valuable data set, without him recording what happened in his day, we wouldn't have enough information to be able to tell that there has been a 7-day change over time. And then the second study that I want to tell you about was conducted by researchers, including Nina Leopold Bradley, who was one of Aldo Leopold's daughters. And it demonstrates that the records her family had kept, that they indicate an earlier arrival of some species to their farm in Wisconsin. So they compared what they had recorded in the past to what they're seeing now, and that's a difference of about 61 years in those two data sets. And we're seeing a 2 to 3 week on average earlier arrival of these migratory birds to their area. So a key thing that I want you to take away from these two examples here is that their records proved valuable to future scientists. And our records, if we keep track of what's happening where we are now, our records can do the same in the future. As we record what we are seeing on our own properties and out in nature, we can contribute to science in the same way. And I'd like to spend the remainder of our time together talking about how you can put what you're noticing going on around you in nature on your properties to work for science. So that brings us back to Phenology and to the organization I represent. Indiana Phenology was founded to collect and share phenology data for Indiana. As we explored earlier, studying phenology is one way of understanding how our environment is changing and how species are reacting to these changes. Because the changes vary from location to location and the response varies from species to species, it's really important to have local data from the places we know and love and want to protect. And right now, there isn't a lot of readily available, accessible phenology data for Indiana, but we're really working to address that and document seasonal change and develop a long-term data set of what's happening when in Indiana. So we work with individuals and groups and schools. Our Indiana Backyard Observers program is for individuals and families that want to observe plants in their own neighborhoods or on their own properties. Our Phenology Trail program, we work with partner sites to establish observation sites and engage their audiences in phenology data collection. And then we also work with schools and to help teachers engage their students in collecting phenology data on their school grounds. Right now we have observers in 30 counties in Indiana. Ultimately, we hope to have observers participating in every county of Indiana, documenting the seasonal changes, the timing of the leafing and the flowering and fruiting of plants in Indiana. We right now focus our education efforts on common native plants, but common non-native plants, invasive species, and less common natives are all part of the picture and all worth studying in this fashion. So one of our goals is to be able to compare the timing of different events from one year to the next, or to compare the timing in different parts of the state. And to be able to identify and examine the trends of the change, phenology calendars, which we have one pictured here, are a really useful tool. So this one shows us some sugar maple data that was collected by our volunteer observers in 2020. So phenology calendars are really an interesting way to visualize the life cycle of plants or animals. And so what we have here is along the bottom, you've got a timeline. It's January through December, and the green lines are times when an observer went out and saw leaves on a sugar maple tree. The orange is when the observers reported seeing open flowers on the tree, and the pink is when they reported seeing fruits or seed cones. When you don't see a line, that means that it wasn't happening at that time. So what is awesome about looking at phenology calendars is at a glance, you can really see the periods of time in which you would expect to see different life cycle things and stages on a plant. And you can use phenology calendars to compare two different species. So you can readily see those species that are early spring plants and they've finished their whole life cycle before we even start getting into summer, versus the ones that are fall flowering and fall fruiting. So phenology calendars are kind of fun. But how cool would it be to have a website where you could visit, where you could explore this data and make comparisons and see what is actually happening in Indiana and when it actually happened in the past, rather than just having a large date range, like we expect leaves to happen sometime between March and June, but to really be able to see the actual date things happened. And that is what we're working toward at Indiana Phenology. So early citizen scientists, they kept notebooks with handwritten observations of phenological events, but our citizen scientists today can use a tool called Nature's Notebook. And Nature's Notebook is a program of the USA National Phenology Network, a platform that they maintain. And it's really designed to be a user-friendly platform for collecting observations in the field, right out there in the trees, to be used both by average citizens and also by professional scientists. And the observations that are collected using this platform become part of the National Phenology Database, which has over 1 million records in it right now. There are about 1,500 different species of plants and animals that you can monitor using Nature's Notebook and the Phenology monitoring protocols. So Nature's Notebook is focused on seasonal and long-term changes in plants and animals. And these changes are studied by observing the same individual plants in a location through the seasons from year to year. So you go back and take data on the same thing over time. There's a second tool we use called iNaturalist. If you're interested, we'll be offering a training on how to use this tool for phenology observations later on this spring. You can find the details on our website or Facebook page. But iNaturalist and several other similar citizen science opportunities really focus on incidental sightings of plants or animals, or single points in time, like you may have heard of a bioblitz. And that's what we call event data. It's just like a point in time. Nature's Notebook is different in that it's focused on that collecting data over time for the same individuals at a given location, which really gives us a more complete picture of what is happening at a site and really allows us to dig into how it's changing over time. So Nature's Notebook observers, they collect data using scientifically vetted, standardized protocols for each of the plant and animal species that are available to observe through Nature's Notebook. These protocols are essentially instructions on how you make the observations, are basically a list of phenophase questions that ask about what you're seeing occurring on an individual plant or observing in an animal species at a given point in time. And each of those phenophases is defined in detail with species-specific information so that you know that you're observing the same thing that everybody else is observing, that you're answering the questions in the same way that everyone else is. And observers answer whether or not they're seeing different things occurring by answering yes, no, or unsure to this series of questions. So you can see here, on the right-hand side, that's what the data sheet looks like. It asks, do you see breaking leaves? And your answer is yes, no, unsure. Like I said, it's designed to be easy, user-friendly, and accurate as a way of collecting data. You can also answer an optional question that tells the intensity or degree to which something is occurring. So with open flowers, it asks how many open flowers you're seeing or what percentage of the flowers are open. Observers can either enter, use traditional paper data sheets and then enter their observations into a web browser application, or you can skip the paper data sheets and just enter your observations directly into the mobile app. I'm a big fan of the one-step process and using that mobile app. A useful feature of the app is that it's designed so that you can collect data when you don't have an internet connection, and then once you get back to a place where you do have a connection, it will sync up that data automatically for you. All of the data that goes into the database is freely available for anyone to download or explore. There are a lot of tools to assist observers and researchers to visualize the data, and you can create personal phenology calendars based on the data that you put in, so that when you collect data, you can really interact with it and it becomes a record for you and your own use, but that's also benefiting other people. So I'd like to invite you to join us in observing and documenting nature. Not only will you learn a lot about what you observe, but you'll be helping scientists around the world and in Indiana to better understand our ecosystems and how they function and how they're changing and what really is happening where you are. You'll also be contributing to the creation of an amazing public resource about nature and the environment here in Indiana. So, are there any special skills required? Not really, just an interest in learning more about plants that are around you and closely observing them. And I'm 100% certain that anyone here has what it takes to be an observer. You just have to be able to tell the differences between what's happening on a plant in a given point in time. Really, it's just a willingness to go outdoors, to look closely, and to ask lots of questions. So the process is really simple. Phenology observations, you go out once a week on average. During the growing season, you can go more often, especially during seasons of rapid change if you'd like. If you don't make it out once a week, that's okay too, because any data is better than no data, which is what which is the status quo right now. So you go out and you visit selected plants, you search for animals in the area if you want, and then you submit your data. There's that data sheet there. The basics of making observations are really pretty simple. You just answer the questions. Do you see something occurring? Yes or no? And you even have the option of putting in you're not sure. I've been using Nature's Notebook for, a good 5 years now. I still use that unsure option on occasion, especially when we're right at the beginning point of different things. That's totally okay. There are, if we're looking at plants, there are 5 phenophases, those definable life cycle stages that have a starting point and ending point. There are 5 of those for leaves, 3 of those for flowers, and 3 for fruits for most plant species. These are the names of the vegetative phenophases, those ones that have to do with the leaves. We're looking at breaking leaf buds or initial growth for things that die back down to the ground. We're looking at increasing leaf size, leaves, colored leaves, falling leaves. And then the reproductive phenophases that we look at are those flowers and fruits. So we look at whether there are flowers or flower buds on the plant, whether they're open flowers. For those plants that also are allergens, we include the pollen release stage because you can use that to study allergens. And then there's also fruit and ripe fruit and recent fruit or seed drop. So you can see that some of these stages overlap a little. If you see ripe fruit on a plant, you also see fruit because ripe fruit is just a form of fruit. But each of the questions are give you specific instructions on what it is you're supposed to look for and how to answer them correctly. So let's give it a try here. This is Eastern Redbud. We're going to look at that for a moment. We've got another couple of weeks before Eastern Redbud starts to do its thing, but it has these beautiful maroon or magenta type flowers in the spring, just covering the whole tree. It has these pod-like fruits in the fall, and then it has heart-shaped, very distinctive leaves that turn a yellow color in the fall. So here we have a picture of Eastern Redbud, and I'm going to give you a moment or so here to take a look at this and think to yourself, what do we see here? All right, we do not see breaking leaf buds, but we do see leaves. We don't see increasing leaf size too. We didn't talk about that much, but that's when the leaves haven't quite reached their full size yet. If you look closely, there are some colored leaves in there, but we can't tell if they're falling leaves. And fruits, there is one big fruit right in the front there. So as you can see, it's pretty quick to go through and make an observation. It just takes a minute or two there. For animals, the process is a little bit different because you create more of a checklist of species you want to look for. And when you record whether you saw one of them, if you did, you also have the option to report on the activity that you witnessed. So here are some of those activities that you might be able to observe for a robin in this case. So how do you start? There are 3 easy steps. You need to join Nature's Notebook, you register your observation site, and then you start observing. So we'll quickly walk through each of these steps just in a brief overview. To get started, you go to naturesnotebook.org. And one important point, you want to remember to join Indiana Backyard Observers. group when you set up your account. So you can either join Nature's Notebook through the web, or you can also download the free app and join there. And depending on which strategy you choose, you also can join our group there. Step 2, you create and register your observation site. So when I talk about an observation site, I'm really talking about a specific location, selected plants, that checklist of animal species that you want to look for, that you have chosen in advance that you're going to go back to over time. And you need to set that up in Nature's Notebook. This is the hardest part of the process, deciding what you want to look at. My advice is to start small. You can always add more later. So when choosing a site, really the number one consideration is convenience. Choose a place that you spend a lot of time, that you like going, that you're interested in the plants there. I imagine all of you here have a particular spot where you would likely want to make observations, and some plants that you are interested in, the timing of their different stages of their life cycle. It does no good to choose a location that you're not going to go to very often, or that you don't care about. So convenience is that number one consideration. Your site has to be smaller than 15 acres. It can be as small as the area around a single plant. So there's no real minimum size, but you don't want to be too big. But you can have as many observation sites as you want. So if you want to observe a site that's bigger than 15 acres, great, you just have 2 sites. And you may want to consider splitting up even a smaller space into multiple different sites so that each observation site has uniform conditions. So if you wanted to observe in a grassy area and in a woodland, you might make those 2 different sites, even if they were right next to each other. Then you have to select your plants and animals. There are 1,500 species to choose from, so you're likely to be able to find something you're interested in on the list. General guidelines, it takes about 2 minutes per plant to make those observations. So 4 to 6 plants is a good starting point, and you can always add more later. And then you pick the animals you want to observe in that area, or that are likely to be associated with the plants that you select. And then you register your site, which basically means you take the choices you just made, the location and the plants and animals that you want to observe, and you input them in Nature's Notebook so that it knows to ask you the right questions. And you can either do that process on the web or through the mobile app. And then you're ready to start observing. And again, you can either do that through the web, recording your observations. You can print data sheets, and you can then input your answers in here, or you can do the same thing, make your observations with that mobile app while you're standing right in front of those plants in that space. As an organization, we offer a variety of resources to help observers, including in-depth training sessions and online resources. And we love to hear from observers via email and are happy to answer any questions and help people get going. So just a few final thoughts here. We've covered a lot of ground tonight, from exploring what phenology is and why it matters, to citizen science and it's important for filling in gaps in data, and to Indiana Phenology and our citizen science programs, and how to document and record phenology using Nature's Notebook. I love this quote from Aldo Leopold: "Keeping records enhances the pleasure of the search." I found this to be true. Documenting phenology can be a personally meaningful practice. I've also found that keeping records really enhances my understanding of the world around me. I think I have a great memory. I think we all think we do. But when we write it down, we don't have to rely on how good our memory is or not. We have that record, and we can go back and we can look at what happened in the past and make comparisons and really get a better feel for what is actually happening around us. But record keeping is even more impactful when it's shared. And as we've seen today, these records have the potential to provide us with important insights into how our ecosystems are functioning and responding to changing conditions. And I hope you'll consider joining me as an Indiana Backyard Observer, and thank you. I believe we have some time for questions.
Yes, we do. Thank you, Amanda. I appreciate your sharing your expertise and passion with us. I'm sure interested in trying out some of these ideas, and I hope other folks on here are as well. If anyone has any questions, feel free to put those in the chat box now, and I'll share those with Amanda. I saw one earlier today. Gregory asked, how large must a leaf be to be counted?
So the definition for the leaf phenophase is that a leaf has to be fully unfolded. And you can read that definition, but it's when the stem point of attachment to the branch is visible. That's when you count it as a leaf. Before that, it's breaking leaf buds.
And it looked like in that Nature's Notebook, it had some pictures and examples where it was pretty well fleshed out by species. That's good, because some of this seems confusing until you see it. Dawn says, academia examines climate change as a negative. Are there any studies on the phenology benefits of climate change? For example, increased robustness of grasslands in desertified areas thanks to higher CO2 levels?
There are some research studies. There are particular types of species that are doing really well, and climate change is great for them, and they're expanding their range. And those are the ones that are adapted to a wide variety of conditions. It's the ones that have very narrow, specific needs that are suffering more from climate change.
Beth asked, what if a plant has both male and female flowers that may mature or appear at different times?
For Nature's Notebook, all of those flowers are just counted as flowers. There's a way to put in some notes and make comments. You can add that in at that point, but there's not really a distinction between the type of flower.
I was curious to see that the way that worked, that it was more of a yes or no. I was envisioning it as a you got to catch it at the right time, and how difficult that might be. So the yes or no seems way more manageable for a regular person. Deborah asked, will birds adjust to seasonal changes or never recover?
Again, like I said, those birds that have very specific narrow range of needs, they're the ones that are going to have a harder time. But there are a lot of birds, particularly those that are showing to be invasive here, that are exotic species, that are doing great, and climate change is going to be great for them, because it opens up a wider range of places where it's hospitable for them.
Mary said, I've been using iNaturalist, but haven't used Nature's Notebook. Guidance on transitioning, merging? Does it make sense to keep up with both?
I use both of them. You can collect different information with iNaturalist that you can't with Nature's Notebook. iNaturalist allows you to put in those pictures. Nature's Notebook doesn't have a feature for putting in pictures, so I use both of them. You may be interested in joining our iNaturalist training program later on, where we'll talk about how you combine both of them.
Sounds good. And I'll get that from you after the event and send that out to people about that training. Mm-hmm. Cheryl said, I've used Nature's Notebook for years. I'd study a single pin oak tree in my backyard, so do not be intimidated. This is a great tool. Thanks for sharing that, Cheryl. Juan Carlos said, where a farmer can find information about phenology to apply to crop nutrition.
So Nature's Notebook doesn't really have crop plants, as many of those in it. I do know that there are reams and reams of research articles written about phenology of plants. Is there a particular crop that you're interested in?
We'll see. It puts Juan, put something in the chat if you'd like a specific information. Kathy asked, is there a commitment time that is required? For example, 1 year, 2 years?
The longer you do it, the better. It's best if you can give it a good full year, then we capture each of the seasons in the full growing cycle. But again, you can do a single tree, you can do a single plant. It can be as small or as large of a project as you really want it to be. But any data is better than no data.
She also asked, is there a set time to start collecting data? I assume she means a time of year.
No, that brings me to a useful point here. No answers are really valuable and useful. So when I'm starting up in the spring, I try to go out before I think things are going to happen so I can get a no, because the way you pinpoint the starting point of a phenophase is the time from when you had a no to when you first say yes. So if you go out more often, you can have a more precise starting point, but it really doesn't matter when you start during the year.
Dawn Marie said, do you know of phenology stats for beekeepers, detriment versus benefit?
I don't know about beekeeping, but that would be something interesting to look at.
Are there bees in the Nature's Notebook? Is that an option?
There are a few species. I don't think most of our native bees are there, but there are some bees in there.
Might be an interesting area to explore. Juan said, we grow a big variety of veggies and fruit trees. My interest is to know how I could feed them during the different cycles during their lives.
Well, I do know some fruit trees are in Nature's Notebook. And in fact, in my own backyard, I use Nature's Notebook to keep track of my fruit trees. And you may want to compare the data you're collecting to just a good resource book that you can get from the library or anywhere else about what the needs are at different stages. And then you can use your data that you're putting into Nature's Notebook to really pinpoint the right time to feed your plants.
But I think you also mentioned earlier that there is already data in those databases that you can look at.
Yeah.
Okay, great. It doesn't look like we have any more questions. If anybody wants to put that one last, we've had several thanks. Amanda, if you'd like to check those out, people are very happy to hear what you had to say and appreciated you sharing with us. Well, it looks like we're at a stopping point and we are just a couple minutes before the hour. So I want to thank you again, Amanda, for taking the time to share your expertise with us. This was very interesting in an area I've been curious about for quite a while and didn't quite know how to get started. So I think this is enough that I can get started at least, and I think others as well. I thank the audience for joining us tonight. We hope you enjoyed it. If you're a woodland owner or interested in forestry, please check out our IFWA website for current information. I'll send you a follow-up email with some upcoming events and some information that Amanda told us about tonight, and I'll notify you when the recording is available for viewing. It'll take me a few weeks to get that captioned. So have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you.